This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. In front of me is a glass of Thornbury Sauvignon Blanc. And in this Zoom conversation, I am with winemaker Simon Fell, who is joining us all the way from Marlborough, New Zealand. How are you today, sir?
Good, thank you, Jamie. Good morning and, well, good afternoon to you.
Yes, yeah. So, at what time did you start your day today, Simon?
Well, I actually had an early start. I've got a colleague that's currently on leave, so he oversees all our bottling, and within the business, we always have a winemaker, for quality reasons, sign off first thing in the morning to ensure that all the quality measures are put in place. So 5 a.m. was my start. Yes, very early. My first Sauvignon Blanc, I tasted at 5:15 in the morning.
How is your palate at 5:15 in the morning?
It's a little dusty, but it's not too bad actually. You pretty sharpen up pretty quickly when you taste the wine going through, so it's not too bad.
I think my earliest in professional circumstances has been around about 6:30 or somewhere round about there, and that was actually quite painful to do. I found it was Riesling in Germany, so incredibly high acid at that point in the day was not quite.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. And obviously also Marlborough Sauvignon Blancs like that too. So that racing, zesty acidity really wakes you up.
Of course. Now we're currently amid this ongoing pandemic, COVID-19. How has the pandemic affected you at Thornbury, and how has it affected you personally?
Yeah, well, Jamie, that's a good question. I mean, we're very fortunate that we are through sort of COVID here in New Zealand now.
Yeah.
But as you were aware, I mean, when COVID hit New Zealand, and it would have been around mid to late March, we were actually, starting our harvest. Not only here for Thornbury, but for the New Zealand wine industry. I was sort of fortunate in a way where, because I make wines from all around the country, Thornbury celebrates New Zealand's iconic wine region. So obviously I start early in the season in Gisborne with my Chardonnay, and being a warmer vintage up there, I managed to get my fruit off before we had lockdown. So I harvested mid-March, and then also in Waipara, in North Canterbury, was quite a warm season, similarly to Marlborough. So the Pinot Gris that I harvested out of North Canterbury came on early. So I managed to get that in just before we went to full-scale lockdown. But then, we're pretty only much as an industry, only around maybe 15% through harvest. So it created a lot of challenges, not only for us, but for many wine companies. We're very fortunate that we're a primary industry, so we could keep operational.
When you say 15%, you mean 15% of your manpower?
15% of total grapes harvested. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
okay, I get it.
Exactly. So, obviously Marlborough was just starting, and that's 80% of the New Zealand wine industry. Fruit comes out of Marlborough. So we had to sort of change our practices a little bit. Obviously I travel a lot because I make wine from every region. So I wasn't able to travel. So I relied a lot on, obviously Zoom meetings like this, or phone calls to our viticulturists and contract grape growers around the country. We created bubbles like a lot of companies. So within our teams, so for example, my colleagues met in Hawke's Bay, they all lived and worked at the winery through the sort of 6-week period, and similarly in Marlborough. And also my grower in Central Otago, he relies a lot on sort of backpackers during the season, for handpicking the Pinot Noir out of Central Otago. And when we went into lockdown, a lot of the backpackers decided to head home, either back to Europe, Canada, or the States. So manpower actually reduced. So that actually created some challenges for them. So they managed to get a small team and brought in camper vans and that were on site, and they stayed within the winery and in the vineyard. And similarly, we did the same with our wineries in Hawke's Bay and Marlborough too. So yeah, it prevented that sort of cross contamination, people,
course,
you know, between regions and things like that, and then also enabled us to, if one team went down, we had the ability to bring in another team from another region if necessary,
if necessary.
to keep the winery in operation.
You didn't need to do that though.
No, we didn't need to do that. There was, I think, one or two cases in Marlborough that came up, not actually in the industry, but in other or other industries, and but they were contained. So, you know, we were very fortunate, you know, not as only as a company, but as New Zealand wine industry to get through it unscathed, really. Because it could have been a huge disaster. I mean, as you know, I mean, our grape industry is nearly a $2 billion export industry now, and you know, we rely on a lot of growers and wine companies to keep operational.
Now, you had a very severe lockdown, meaning that almost everything was closed. How did that impact your sales?
Yeah, so domestically on premise suffered, you know, drastically because obviously all the restaurants closed, and however, we did see a good uptake in grocery.
Right.
I think with a lot of you know, consumers staying home, working from home, there was a lot of online growth, and a lot of especially small wine companies adapted to that pretty quickly. And if you think about you know, smaller wine regions like Central Otago that rely a lot on tourism, you know, and most of their wine sales are either through cellar door or the local restaurant trade, they didn't have the ability to be able to, you know, get their wines out there into the market. So they adapted to online sales pretty quickly, and they saw a good pickup and good local support. Whereas, you know, for us personally, we've been a little bit bigger. We have the ability to sell through grocery, and so we've got good growth through there, and then also exports too. We had some great growth in the Australian market and the UK market. So yeah, so we did quite well as an industry in grocery side of the business.
And how did it affect you personally, your family life and the like?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite tough. I mean, you know, for me personally, you know, I was lucky because I was coming into work every day and working with the winemaking team. So even though we were in our own little bubble, we had that socialization and, you know, and chatting on the phone to my colleagues and around the country. And so, but, you know, for example, for my wife, I mean, she works in a different industry here in Auckland where we're based. She works for local government. So they were all asked to stay at home. And so, you know, obviously, you know, did a lot of work through Zoom calls and emails and things like that, but she missed out on that whole sort of socialization side of it. So she was very keen to sit down with a glass of wine at the end of the day when I came home and chat. But as you know, Jamie, harvest is long hours, and so it was quite tough. I'd come home and have to be quite social too, and but you know, when you're tired working for 16, 18 hours a day during harvest, it's quite hard on the family, you know. Yeah.
So you've basically opened up. You're back to normality in New Zealand almost right now, apart from your closed borders, I believe.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so borders are still closed. Obviously, there's a lot of expats returning home from overseas, but you go into isolation for 2 weeks, 14 days. but pretty much, yeah, back to normal. Restaurants are open. Everyone's sort of back at work. There's a lot of industries where a lot of companies have said to their employees if they want to carry on working from home, they can,
Right, right.
which is working quite well. Yeah, but it's quite nice, and there's been very good support because no one can travel, especially we've just come out of school holidays,
Yeah.
so and been here in the middle of winter, a lot of families head off to Australia or the South Pacific to get a little bit of warmth during the winter months. Being unable to travel, they've actually taken up travelling domestically. So there's been a really good campaign, not only by the government, but by local regional tourism boards to get Kiwis out travelling around the country and supporting local communities, supporting local restaurants and that. And so it's been fantastic. And actually, my wife and I next month, we've planned 2-week annual leave and we've hired a camper van and we're going to do a little South Island trip around.
Lovely.
Really nice.
Lovely.
Yeah, so.
Well, I mean, your country's mitigation and management of this pandemic are the envy of the world right now, and it gives us hope that we can all get there with if our governments and the people do the right thing. What do you think it is about the people of New Zealand that meant that they followed the government's direction the way that they did?
Yeah, I think, being a small country, small population, and we sort of look out for ourselves a little bit more. I don't know a lot of other communities around the world do that too, but everyone sort of took it on board. It's like, right, okay, this is what we have to do, and let's just get on with it and do it. And obviously there was a few grumbles here and there, obviously, because people were hurting, but everyone at the end of the day, I think, realised that the only way to combat this virus is if everyone is pretty much on the same page, works together as a community, and gets through it. And it seemed to work, And I mean, you see a lot in other countries where a lot of people don't want to wear masks and things like that. And whereas here, it's like, right, okay, put a mask on. If it's going to prevent spreading the virus, let's just do it. And it was really nice. And even I noticed when, during the full lockdown, I'd get home if I had a day off or something during harvest, and my wife and I'd go for a walk around the neighbourhood. Even though everyone was keeping their social distancing, there seemed to be a real sense of people looking out for each other. I got to meet a lot of my sort of extended neighbours around the neighbourhood a lot better. You'll be chatting across the road and ensuring everyone's okay. And it was actually quite nice in that respect. It did create this sense of community.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So,
I mean, it's interesting. You said before we started this interview that you just don't want the people of New Zealand and the government to rest on their laurels where they're because of where they're at right now. Because if you look across the Tasman Sea there, your cousins over in Australia are having a hell of a time.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, especially as you see in Victoria. And again, I mean, it's sort of been driven into a lot of New Zealanders here that, we still have to be a little bit more vigilant and keep sort of some sort of sense of social distancing still, even though everyone's interacting and that, because as we can see, I mean, the virus can come back very quickly. I mean, currently, I think we had 2 new cases in managed isolation, I think 2 days ago.
Right.
We've got currently around about 27 managed COVID cases in isolation. So it's very easy for that to sort of get out of control if we don't take heed of it.
Yeah. So I'm here enjoying a glass of your 2019 vintage Sauvignon Blanc, Marlborough, and I couldn't help but notice this little passion fruit sticker here, a wonder of marketing, because it does have that auto-suggestive quality that when somebody picks this up, pours themselves a glass, they're going to be imagining a really sweaty, passion fruit, which is a marvelous thing. It really is a mouth-watering wine. Now, what is it that brings about that particular aromatic profile in the wine?
Well, that's a really good question, Jamie. And I mean, those little stickers were, as you said, a very good way to communicate that sort of flavour characteristic, which is
Yeah.
typical of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. And when you think of Marlborough in general, I mean, Marlborough is broken up into two primary sort of sub-regions. You've got the Wairau Valley to the north, and then across the Wither Hills to the south, you have the Arbitrary Valley.
Yep.
And depending on where your vineyards are located in those two sub-regions, they distinctly produce quite different flavour characteristics when it comes to Sauvignon Blanc. And so, for example, with this Thornbury blend, this is a wine that's a blend of those two sub-regions. So approximately, I think it's around, off the top of my head, the 2019 is around sort of 40% of our vineyards from the Wairau Valley and 60% from the Arbitrary. And what you find with the Wairau Valley Sauvignon Blanc has been a little bit warmer up in that sub-region, and the flavour characteristics are more into that sort of riper end of the fruit spectrum when it comes to Sauvignon. So you see more of those sort of passion fruit flavours, a bit more of those sort of riper tropical notes. And then with the Arbitrary Valley, the flavour characteristics are a little bit more herbal. They're a little bit more into that what we call herbaceousness, or sometimes we like to use the descriptor like snow peas or black currants, which is very typical. And a lot more sort of acidity you find in the Sauvignon Blanc down in that sub-region. Being a little bit further south, it's a little bit more exposed to the ocean there, a little bit more windswept, get a little bit more minerality in the wines. And so, yeah, they're a nice sort of real distinct point of difference. And predominantly, most of my vineyards are in the Wairau Valley. It just depends on the blend each year. And hence, so with the Thornbury, I'm trying to make these wines that have this beautiful sort of drinkability and approachability about them, but still typify what Marlborough's all about. Hence, putting passion fruit. I mean, that's a very typical and most probably common flavour in Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc on the label. Really sort of communicates that quite well.
What do you believe it is that brings about those methoxypyrazines and the volatile thiols that you find in Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc more so than Sauvignon Blanc from anywhere else in New Zealand, or indeed anywhere else in the world?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, when you even compare Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc to, say, Hawke's Bay Sauvignon Blanc, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc typically has that characteristic, being a more temperate, cooler climate wine-growing region. But all research has shown that, there seems to be a higher concentration of these methoxypyrazine compounds that you find in Marlborough compared to any other region in New Zealand or around the world. And it relates typically to the unique growing season that they have in Marlborough. And, again, you hear these examples of New Zealand has these very sort of warm growing degree days during the summer months, but very cool nights. And so this huge diurnal temperature variation that you find, especially in Marlborough, can be quite remarkable in terms of producing these really vibrant sort of, thiol, passion fruit style Sauvignon Blancs. And as I say, it's pretty much, our growing season. Soil types have a big influence on the style of wines that we produce down in Marlborough there. Being a big alluvial sort of floodplain, New Zealand's made up of all this sort of tectonic activity, and over the many millions of years, a lot of that volcanic rock sort of washed down into plains and created these amazing sort of alluvial floodplains and dissected rivers and things like that. So you see a huge variance in sort of river gravels through to other sort of siltier, sandier sort of soil types, and yeah, that all has an influence on the style also. So
Now,
Yeah,
I don't mean this to be a gotcha question in any
yeah.
way whatsoever, but I'm curious as to how much you feel cultured yeast plays a role in that aromatic profile.
Yes, that is a good question. I mean, because I mean, a lot of sort of the more sort of commercial Sauvignon that you're finding out of Marlborough we're using sort of yeast that are being developed to sort of really enhance those sort of flavour
Yeah.
characteristics of that particular varietal. Um, you know, at sort of our sort of single vineyard and reserve tears and some of the wines that are made. A lot of producers are using sort of indigenous yeast off the vineyard
Yeah.
to create a little bit of complexity that way. But yeast definitely have a big part to play in terms of the flavour characteristics. So
Over all of your years in the industry making
yeah,
New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, what is your preferred method for making a Sauvignon Blanc at this level here?
yeah. So like for the Thornbury, as I say, I'm trying to make a style that's has that beautiful approachability and
Hmm.
consumability about it. So I'm doing, obviously it's nothing very different than a lot of other producers. A lot of cool ferment. I machine harvest all our fruit, and we find with Sauvignon Blanc, and even at the top level, machine
Yeah.
harvesting is very good because it releases those methoxypyrazines very early in the winemaking process. Um, Using cultured yeast to enhance those particular flavour characteristics. So, I use across all my vineyards that I source from. I have about 10 vineyards across that greater Marlborough region. I'll use different yeasts for those different sites that I found work quite well. And I keep all these parcels separate until blending. So it gives me lots of blending options later when I look at all these wines on the bench, post harvest. And another method to build in a little bit of palate weight and structure in the Sauvignon Blanc, post primary fermentation, I leave the wine on its yeast lees, gross lees, for an extended period of time. I actually mix the tank. It's just like batonnage. A lot of consumers have heard that term. In the barrel, where you mix all the lees up to build that sort of texture and weight. I do it in tank, and I just use a pump to pump over the yeast lees over the top
Yep, why
of
not?
the wine. And and I'll taste it each week and build in that texture and palate weight. And it gives the wine a bit more sort of texture and a bit more creaminess on the palate. And it nicely balances out that sort of beautiful purity of acidity that you find in Sauvignon Blanc. So
It's I've tasted this quite a few times in the past, but I have to say that today I was especially impressed with it, and I'm not sure if it's because it's flower day, or it was just the perfect bottle of wine for what it was turned out to be quite a kind of sticky afternoon in Ontario. So I really appreciate your chat today and your time, of course. You said that you were supposed to be touring the States and Canada.
yes, yeah, I would have been there a few weeks ago actually. So unfortunately, as we mentioned, with no international travels.
Yeah.
So yes, so my colleague Rod, who's based in Toronto, market manager for Canada,
Yes. Yeah.
he has to do all the work himself.
Well, once we do get back to some sort of sense of normality when it comes to international travel, it would be great to host you here in Ontario, in Toronto, and taste in person.
Absolutely, I'd love to be there too, Jamie. And
Hey,
I really appreciate being here this morning, and it's been fun.
excellent. Take care. Bye
Excellent.
for now.
Take care,
Thank you.
Jamie. Thank you, mate.